The world spins on a thread of unseen ties, gossamer strands binding nations through an intricate web of finance and obligation. Consider for a moment how every country on Earth seems shackled by debt. It begs the question, if all are indebted, to whom do they owe their allegiance? It is a paradox as old as currency itself, and one that evokes unease, a feeling that there is something inherently flawed in the foundation of wealth exchanged across borders. This tale is not merely about dollars, pound notes, or yen. It is the story of the architects who built the towering edifice of modern finance, and how their decisions resonate through generations, echoing across the chambers of power. Four pivotal figures emerge as central in this saga. Individuals who, in their quest for profit and stability, altered the course of history itself. William Patterson, Nathan Rothschild, J.P. Morgan, and Paul Volcker. Patterson's journey begins in 1694, as he deftly wove banking into the fabric of the British economy, establishing the Bank of England. The bank served as a bastion of power for the monarchy, providing the funds necessary to wage wars and expand colonies. Yet, beneath its gilded exterior existed a chilling truth. The creation of currency meant an unceasing need for repayment, a cycle that tied governments to their markets with invisible cords. Nations began to rise and fall on the tides of financial obligation, becoming increasingly reliant on the very structure they had built, unaware that they were ensnared within it. Fast-forwarding to the early 19th century, we encounter Nathan Rothschild, a man whose name would become synonymous with wealth and influence. Through cunning maneuvers, Rothschild amassed staggering riches while facilitating both war and peace. Yet, his actions reminded those watching from the periphery that power begets control, and control could incite fear. As debt became the currency of trust, entire nations sought his favor, unwittingly binding themselves to financial fates often dictated by a single man's ambition. The 20th century beckons with the rise of J.P. Morgan. His banks became the lifeblood of American industry, granting loans and lines of credit to burgeoning enterprises. Yet, lurking behind the vision of progress was a tick-tock urgency, an awareness that reliance on borrowed resources could lead to dire consequences. Morgan understood the delicate balance between risk and reward, yet the shadow of anxiety still loomed. As the stock market galloped into the roaring 20s, the seeds of inevitable collapse were sown. Morgan's intricate web began to fray as the very fabric of American prosperity unraveled into chaos. The world trembled again as Paul Volcker took the reins of the Federal Reserve during the tumultuous late 20th century. Faced with rampant inflation and crumbling confidence, Volcker made the life-altering decision to raise interest rates. The United States, once a beacon of stability, teetered on the brink of ruin. Nations across the globe were devastated by the aftermath of his policies, caught in a web of dependency born from endless cycles of borrowing. Yet, amid the despair emerged a cutting realization: the inescapability of this financial architecture. The world was locked in a pact it could neither fully understand nor escape. Each innovation brought by these architects left an indelible mark on history. They had built a machine designed to perpetuate itself, yet the outcomes were often disastrous. The weight of obligation stripped governments of their sovereignty, their power slowly siphoned away into a vortex of debt. As economies fluctuated, so too did the balance of power, creating ripples that cascaded across oceans and continents. The very pillars of finance now rested on the frail promises, contracts, and precarious loans that filled ledgers with numbers that, in the end, masked a deeper fear, one of debt that could never be repaid. As this story threads its way through the annals of time, there is an unsettling realization: trust is a double-edged sword. The architects built their empires on the assurance of wealth that would come from amalgamated debt. Yet how easily could that trust dissipate? History has shown that the strongest evanesce quietly, almost imperceptibly, an obscure understanding dawning that no currency is invincible and no empire eternal. Consider how the United States, having attained its apex post-World War II, became the linchpin of the global economy. The Bretton Woods Agreement solidified the dollar's status, making currencies subservient to it. The promise of gold conversion guaranteed stability. Banks across the world hoarded dollars as lifelines, feeding an insatiable need that bound nations to the altar of trust. But lurking at the heart of this promise was a fragile illusion, one that Nixon shattered in 1971 when he severed the dollar's link to gold, transforming it into a currency of pure faith. As the gold windows slammed shut, apprehension stirred beneath the surface. For how stable is a currency without a tangible anchor? The world adjusted, and oil became the new anchor. With calculated acquiescence, the U.S. courted Saudi Arabia, ensuring that oil would only be sold in dollars. Every engine that purred, every light that flickered, all depended on this currency. The delicate balance was tilted further, and with each transaction, power shifted to those who controlled the dollar. The unseen war intensified, as governments found themselves adrift in a sea of obligations undergirded by fear of devaluation. As history crept into the 21st century, the intertwining fates of nations crystallized into a grim tapestry. When crises emerged, be they financial calamities or trade disputes, the reverberations were felt across the globe. The dollar served as a life raft, even when its own foundations threatened to crumble under the immense weight of unsustainable debt. The respect demanded by the currency entwined with anxiety, ensnaring countries in an invisible bond, one that granted the U.S. unparalleled influence while simultaneously leading to burgeoning dissatisfaction. As whispers of alternative currencies began to weave through the corridors of power in places like China and Russia, a new undercurrent emerged. The dollar's dominance seemed as solid as the walls of a fortress. Yet what happens when those walls begin to crack? What becomes of an empire when belief falters? The very privilege that allowed the U.S. to print currency at will now risked becoming an anchor of its own making. History tells us that every empire faces a reckoning. Those that rise through unbridled ambition invariably falter under the weight of their own excess. The question then becomes not if the cycle will break, but when. The currents of finance shift silently, often unnoticed, yet they carry the potential to erode long-held beliefs, just as water wears away stone. And so, as we bear witness to this unfolding story, it becomes imperative to grasp the heartbeat of finance. Every crisis, every recession, is a part of the grand tapestry that shapes our world. Money is not simply an exchange, it is power, predicated on trust that, while seemingly infinite, remains delicate. In the end, those who build their lives on digits and promises might find that the concrete pillars of real wealth lie not in bonds or stocks, but in tangible skills, resources, and knowledge. When the mechanics of trust break down, only those with wisdom and adaptability will endure. As nations grapple with the specter of debt, it is clear the dollar's reign rests on confidence as much as it does on commerce. It isn't merely about the currency, but the faith placed within it. The hidden war for supremacy spins on, leaving behind a silence filled with waiting echoes, and the shadows of uncertainty linger thick in the air. In a world where belief is woven into the fabric of finance, the whispers of discontent coil tighter, building a tension that could one day erupt. What happens when that faith takes flight, when nations jettison dependence and forge new paths into the unknown? That reckoning, buried beneath the layers of history, may someday emerge, unraveling the very foundations of this precarious empire, leaving behind silent ruins of shattered dreams, pages of the past waiting to be unearthed by those willing to look beyond the surface. And so, we turn our gaze once more to the entwined fates of nations, glimpsing the present through the lens of lessons long forgotten. As the 21st century unfurled, murmurs of change echoed across continents. Nations once content to follow the dollar began plotting their own destinies, fueled by an appetite for autonomy from the American grip. The world watched with bated breath as financial experiments took shape, eager to challenge the supremacy that the dollar had wrought. Digital currencies emerged from the ether like phantoms of rebellion, promising to disrupt the very fabric of the financial system. The likes of Bitcoin and Ethereum floated into the public consciousness, blurring the lines of trust and skepticism, and stirring conversations that would redefine money itself. Across the Pacific, China, with its insatiable economic machine, began to entertain dreams of a currency not tethered to the whims of Washington. The yuan crept into global trade, steadily usurping the dollar in transactions, a subtle coup d'etat flourishing in the shade of towers that once gleamed with American pride. Yet, behind these ambitious overtures lay a knowledge so poignantly ingrained in the global consciousness. The specter of debt still haunted every ambition. While currencies floated like leaves on a stream, the currents of obligation swirled beneath, binding nations to the same cycle they sought to escape. Even as fresh ideas sought footing in the sunlight, the shadows remained, memories of those architects whose monuments still cast long shadows over a world in flux. Patterson, Rothschild, Morgan, and Volcker had long departed, yet their influence reverberated with vibrancy, infusing dialogues of new economic policies with relics of old ideologies. The teachings of patience and perception had sown seeds of dependency too deep to weed out entirely. Markets remained fickle, driven by both the fear of failure and the allure of prosperity. Every piece of financial technology pushed forward was shadowed by the reality that in this story, wealth is rarely just wealth, but a set of chains that demanding sacrifice to uphold. A harbinger of instability emerged in the tech-laden landscape of the modern economy, a web of borrowed money that crisscrossed the globe, perpetuating a cycle of consumerism that left many battered by unforeseen consequences. While new platforms promised immediate gratification, economies stood precariously on the brink, teetering under the expectations of growth that, traced back to their origins, linked directly back to the lifeblood of the dollar. The engines ran hot, yet the fuel was running low, drenching the world in a cocktail of enthusiasm and anxiety. Amid the backdrop of crypto revolutions and fintech innovations, the global South eyed the North, wary of a repeat performance of colonialist tactics disguised in modernity's shiny facade. Nations that suffered through the wrath of financial empires began to align with one another, searching for solidarity in the face of perceived oppression. Agreements that whispered promises of cooperation filled conference rooms, each country hungrily reaching for a foothold in a system that forever seemed to favor the elite. The narrative of rebellion, however, was fraught with challenges. Alliances shifting like sand beneath their feet, and ambitions frequently undermined by betrayals built on distrust. The tightening grip of inflation squeezed governments anew, devaluing currencies. A ghost of the past re-emerging with an unsettling familiarity. It was an unwelcome reminder of shattered dreams, a modern version of the Great Depression's specter looming near, tugging at the frayed edges of the fabric woven with trust. As political divides deepened in the United States, so too did the dissent against the very system that had once promised prosperity. The political theater unfolded, dramatic and charged, and the churning masses seized upon a singular realization. The dollar was not merely a protector, it was also a master, one willing to sacrifice the very people it was meant to serve upon the altar of corporate interests and unbridled greed. In a moment so archetypal that it felt like a scene pulled from the pages of history, the United States faced a reckoning. A series of protests erupted, echoing cries that had long been muffled beneath the weight of financial obligations. Citizens hammered the streets, flags waving, voices rising in solidarity against the impending crises. In that tumultuous gathering, there was a reflection of Patterson's rise, Rothschild's ambition, Morgan's vigilance, and Volcker's choices, as generations confronted the legacy handed down to them, one marked by both established power and staggering debt. Governments were forced to act, though the steps taken felt hesitant and uncertain. A reformist tide surged as proposals poured forth designed to challenge systemic inequities. The promise of new fiscal policies and the potential decay of existing structures brought a timid hope that perhaps this time might herald a shift in the balance of power. But with each motion, the specter of fear lingered, whispering that true change demands courage, and courage requires letting go of both privilege and entitlement. The tension between hope and hesitation crescendoed to a palpable tone, leaving a void filled only by questions. Was true autonomy possible when the entire system was riddled with dependence? Was rebalancing even feasible when the architect's dreams had constructed so many walls? Nowhere was this struggle more evident than in classrooms, where the currency of knowledge became the new cash. Educators searched for methods to teach the young, not only about finance and markets, but about the lessons woven between them. The focus shifted towards nurturing skills and resilience, building lives that could weather the inevitable storms conjured by the architects. Promising pathways emerged before frustrated youths who prioritized ingenuity over obligation, forging their own routes toward independence, subtly shifting the narrative from dependence on currency to strength of mind. As the global scene grew increasingly fraught, one question lingered in the air, tantalizing yet ominous. In an age where the dollar's throne seems inseparable from history, could it withstand a revolution of thought? Would the world still reflect the fragile edifice of finance, or could it hew new structures that prioritize sustainability over speculation? The answers lie not merely in the realm of finance, but in the hearts of the people living and breathing the fresh air of possibility. A new generation, aware of the past's pitfalls, embarks on a journey toward understanding and redefining value. They wield digital tools not simply as currency replacements, but as instruments for inquiry and growth, envisioning a world not dependent upon the shadow of the dollar, but illuminated by a spectrum of choices. As history ever pushes forward, so too must we, navigating through uncertainty with the comprehensions gleaned from those who shaped our present, empowered by the wisdom that real wealth awakens, not from contracts or credit, but from courage, creativity, and an unyielding belief in the potential of tomorrow. Epilogue. And thus the hidden cycle spins ever onward, wrapped in layers of both ambition and caution. Each decade adds its own chapters, weaving new narratives into the overarching story of humanity's struggle for autonomy, identity, and trust. The dollar remains, at once powerful and perilous, promising prosperity while demanding fealty. But amid the resilient heartbeats of the world, the realization dawns. The empire that wields currency as a weapon may also find itself undone by the unfathomable strength found in collective belief in a future unbound by old chains. Time will tell if that belief can triumph, shattering illusions to uncover truths that spark transformations, untethered, unfettered, and forever evolving. In this tapestry we thread, woven into life's grand narrative, may we each find our own power to believe, to dream, and to shape an ever-shifting world in ways that respect both history and hope. Hosting feels bubbled within him, the conviction of a conscience made volatile by revelations of a coming era. They resumed their digging, planning sessions now layered with urgency and newfound purpose. The rain intensified outside, reverberating against the glass, each drop weighed heavy like the implications of every bold assertion retreating into history. The walls of the financial world enclosed them, yet knowledge illuminated the shadows. Through sleepless nights, they embodied those whispers of the past, forging connections, gathering threads, nurturing insights until the framework evolved into something more, a relational tapestry revealing the intricate designs concealed beneath the monetary surface. The city carried on below them, utterly blissful in its ignorance, as they navigated the crossings that could lead them to answers. The looming whispers of a world caught between what it had relied on for so long and the reckoning that beckoned. Because even amidst the glow of Manhattan's skyline, it was always the shadows haunted by the whispers of a forgotten history that begged to be unearthed, one truth at a time. And in the ebbs and flows of an economy built on borrowed trust, betrayal waited just a breath away. And in this chaotic becoming, the most resilient legacy remained, one that those new architects of value cherished above all, to forge a joint destiny grounded in faith, driven by innovation, that would not just resist the empire, but dismantle it entirely, piece by unyielding piece. They awoke to possibilities anew as payments fell silent, a melody of potential unfurling in their wake, waiting for each of them to seize their rightful place in a world reborn. In the end, it was not debt that wrote their story. It was the courage to create anew.